The
Wait,
fluorescent
don't go
lights
in
of
there!
Henderson
What?
Tower
Why
hummed their
not?
familiar tune
It's
as
not
Marcus
fake,
wiped
trust
down
me.
the marble floor for the third time that evening. His hands, rough, calloused, honest hands, moved in practiced circles while his mind wandered to the stack of medical bills sitting on his kitchen counter. His daughter Emma needed another round of treatments, and the numbers kept climbing higher than any building he'd ever cleaned. Daddy works in a castle, she'd told her kindergarten teacher last week, her gap-toothed smile lighting up the parent-teacher conference. Marcus had smiled too, even as his heart cracked a little. If only she knew her castle was just 30 floors of steel and glass that he scrubbed every night while she slept at his mother's house. It was nearly midnight when he heard the elevator chime. Marcus glanced up, his mop pausing mid-stroke. Nobody should be working this late, especially not on a Friday. The elevator doors began to slide open on the ground floor, and that's when he saw it, a thin trail of smoke seeping through the crack, accompanied by the acrid smell of burning electrical wires. "Don't get in the elevator," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the empty lobby. He dropped his mop with a clatter and sprinted toward the closing doors, his work boots slapping against the wet floor. Through the narrowing gap, he could see her, a woman in an expensive suit, her phone pressed to her ear, one hand reaching for the button panel. Their eyes met for a split second. Hers were confused, annoyed even, probably thinking he was just some overzealous janitor making a fuss about nothing. But Marcus saw the smoke thickening, saw the way the elevator lights flickered ominously, and he did the only thing his body would allow. He threw himself forward, his shoulder connecting with hers as he shoved her backward out of the elevator with enough force to send them both tumbling onto the lobby floor. The elevator doors sealed shut. 3 seconds later, a muffled explosion echoed through the shaft, followed by the horrifying screech of metal cables snapping. The elevator car plummeted 30 floors, and the impact shook the entire building like a minor earthquake. Emergency alarms began wailing, sprinklers activated, and Marcus lay on the wet marble floor, his arm throbbing where he'd hit the ground, staring at the dented elevator doors that had nearly become a tomb. The woman he'd knocked down was breathing hard beside him, her designer briefcase spilled open, papers scattered across the wet floor. She turned to look at him, her face pale, mascara beginning to run from the sprinklers. You just saved your life, ma'am," Marcus said simply, pushing himself up with a wince. "Old elevator's been acting funny all week. I reported it, but..." He shrugged, helping her to her feet. "You okay?" She nodded slowly, still in shock, still processing how close she'd come to death. "I'm Catherine Wells," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm the CEO of Henderson Pharmaceuticals," Marcus finished, recognizing her from the photos in the lobby. "I know, ma'am. I clean your office every Tuesday and Thursday." He started gathering her papers, carefully shaking off the water. "You really shouldn't be here this late. It's not safe." Catherine watched this janitor, this man who'd just risked his life for hers without a second's hesitation, meticulously collecting her belongings as if saving people was just another item on his nightly checklist. When she reached for her phone to call for help, Marcus was already on his radio, calmly reporting the incident to building security and requesting emergency services. That should have been the end of it. A dramatic story Catherine would tell at dinner parties, maybe a nice bonus check for Marcus, a handshake, and back to their separate worlds. But Catherine Wells hadn't become CEO of a billion-dollar pharmaceutical company by ignoring important details. And something about Marcus, the quiet dignity in his movements, the way he'd immediately checked on her welfare before his own, stayed with her long after the emergency crews left. She made some calls, asked some questions. What she learned made her blood run cold. Marcus Rivera, night janitor, 34 years old. Widowed 3 years ago when his wife lost her battle with cancer. Single father to 5-year-old Emma, who is currently undergoing treatment for the same genetic condition that had taken her mother. Marcus worked 2 jobs, janitorial at Henderson Tower and weekend shifts at a warehouse, trying to cover medical expenses that his minimal insurance barely touched. He'd sold his car, downsized to a 1-bedroom apartment, and frequently skipped meals to make sure Emma had everything she needed. The cruelest irony. Henderson Pharmaceuticals manufactured the very medication Emma needed, selling it at prices that put it out of reach for people exactly like Marcus. Catherine sat in her penthouse office the following Monday, staring at the file on her desk, shame burning in her chest. This man, who could barely afford to keep his daughter alive, had thrown himself in front of an elevator to save her life. He hadn't hesitated, hadn't calculated the worth of a CEO's life versus a janitor's. He'd just acted, with the kind of pure, instinctive goodness that seemed increasingly rare in the world she inhabited. She made a decision. Wednesday evening, Marcus was giving Emma a piggyback ride up the cracked sidewalk to their apartment building, her laughter ringing through the humid air like bells. "Higher, Daddy, higher," she squealed, her small hands gripping his shoulders. That's when he saw it, a silver Porsche 911 parked in his usual spot, gleaming under the streetlights like a spaceship that had landed in the wrong neighborhood. And leaning against it, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse instead of her usual power suit, was Catherine Wells. Marcus stopped walking, confusion and embarrassment flooding through him. Emma slid off his back, suddenly shy, pressing against his leg. "Daddy, who's that pretty lady?" "Mr. Rivera," Catherine said, pushing off from the car. "I apologize for showing up unannounced. I needed to speak with you." "Ma'am, if this is about the elevator thing, you really didn't need to." "Stop." Catherine held up a hand. "Please, just stop." She took a breath, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that looked almost like tears. "Do you know what I did after that night? I went home to my 8,000 square foot house, took a hot shower in my marble bathroom, and tried to go to sleep. But I couldn't. Because I kept seeing your face, the way you didn't even think before you acted. No hesitation, no calculation. You just saved me." "Anyone would have done the same," Marcus said quietly, uncomfortable with the attention. Emma hugged his leg tighter. "No," Catherine said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And that's what haunts me. I started asking questions about you, Marcus. I learned about Emma, about your late wife, about the jobs you work, the sacrifices you make." Her voice cracked. "I learned that my company is one of the reasons you're struggling. We manufacture Emma's medication, and we price it so high that people like you can't afford it without choosing between medicine and everything else." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. What could he say? It was all true. "I can't change the entire pharmaceutical industry overnight," Catherine continued, "but I can change this. I've established a foundation, the Rivera Foundation for Accessible Healthcare. Its first initiative is providing free medication to families who can't afford critical treatments. Emma will never lack for medicine again, Marcus. And neither will thousands of other children." Marcus felt his knees weaken. "Ma'am, I can't, that's too much." "It's not enough," Catherine said fiercely. "Not nearly enough. But it's a start. Additionally, Henderson Pharmaceuticals is creating a new position, Director of Employee Welfare and Community Outreach. It comes with a full salary, benefits, and the opportunity to make real change from inside the company. If you want it, the job is yours." "I don't have a college degree," Marcus whispered, overwhelmed. "I'm just a..." "You're not just anything," Catherine interrupted. "You're the man who reminded me why we do what we do. You're the man who showed me that humanity, compassion, and selflessness still exist. That's worth more than any degree." She paused, glancing down at Emma, who was watching with wide, curious eyes. "Your daughter needs her father. She needs him healthy, present, and not working himself to death. Please, let me do this. Let me pay forward what you gave me, a chance to live." Marcus looked down at Emma, at her thin face that would soon fill out with proper nutrition, at her eyes that held so much trust and love. He thought about his wife, about the promise he'd made at her bedside to take care of their little girl no matter what. And he thought about all the other parents out there, fighting the same impossible fight. "Okay," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Okay." Catherine smiled, and it transformed her entire face. She reached out her hand, and Marcus shook it, two people from completely different worlds, connected by a moment of crisis and forged into something new by the power of human kindness. 6 months later, the Rivera Foundation had helped over 3,000 families access life-saving medications. Marcus sat in his new office at Henderson Pharmaceuticals, reviewing applications, making decisions that changed lives. And every morning, he dropped Emma off at her new school, where she was thriving, healthy, and still telling everyone that her daddy worked in a castle. Because sometimes, the castle finds you. And sometimes, the princess saves the janitor right back.